Welcome everyone virtually. My name's Edwin David, and I'm going to be talking about several aspects on securing your cloud. So just a few housekeeping items. I will be posting my slide decks probably within the next day or two out on GitHub. So if you think you missed something or if something is too small to read, I will have those slide decks posted after the fact. Also, if you're interested in getting just really kind of a primer around insecure defaults, because some of the slide decks that you'll see in here was posted in that webinar presentation that TrustedSec did a couple weeks ago. You're welcome to view that at any time at YouTube to get a better understanding of what some of the secure defaults are in the Azure cloud. So who am I? Again, I'm Edwin David. I work in the Force Cloud practice. I'm a security consultant for TrustedSec. My handle is RootSecDev. I primarily do Azure cloud penetration testing. Just some of my background for those that are interested. I've been a sysadmin for the past 12 plus years, focusing on Active Directory security and Azure security. And then I hold several cloud security certifications with a blue team background. So getting started today, we're going to be doing like a mix of offensive security operations in Azure. Along with that, we're going to be going through just some misconfigurations that I have seen, how we kind of handle exploitation around some of those misconfigurations, and just pivoting in further into the Azure cloud. So we're going to be going through several different attack phases, everything from Recon, password spraying, how MFA can be typically bypassed once you do land in Azure. What are kind of some of the pivot points of where you need to go to next to get some type of privilege escalation in the environment. And then we'll move on from other things like mixed IAM privileges, finding insecure Azure storage, and pivoting in further from there. So our first focus today is going to be around reconnaissance. There's a couple tools that I'm going to be showing, nothing live demo, just screenshots of different tooling that I use throughout a penetration test engagement lifecycle. And one of the first things before I even get started with any type of user enumeration is I like to use a tool called AD Internals. What you're seeing here is just kind of my lab tenant and the way it's set up. I have it kind of insecure on a couple different configurations. You'll see that I have desktop SSO enabled, and I'll get into that later throughout my slide deck presentation. Along with that, you're able to detect if there's an MDI instance in the environment. So that's for like Defender for Identity. That kind of lets you know if the tenant has some extra protections before you start any type of cloud operation against the target. So along with general reconnaissance, typically some of the tools that I like to use are like Dehashed, Hunter.io. I really like to scrape PDFs from public facing websites because in a lot of instances they will have creator or authors that may either disclose the SAM account naming convention in the on-prem Active Directory environment, or in this case, we see here that this PDF was produced in Microsoft 365. So the main point of some of these tools is to do some background checking on how email formats are handled in the target tenant. And then this is one of the first tools that I use to start doing user enumeration reconnaissance in Azure. It's called Team Filtration. One of our senior security consultants, Melvin Flangnick, wrote it. It's a very amazing tool. It can do enumeration, password spraying. You can backdoor accounts with it. You can do as data exfiltration capabilities. Um, it has its own built-in word list, so it has statistically likely usernames built in. If you are not enumerating enough addresses, you can bring your own word list and use stuff like census data and things like that. And you can target um, Microsoft Teams endpoints with it as well. If all else fails, there's a validate MSOL method that's available. So, for example, if OneDrive enum and Microsoft Teams enum is not working, you can directly do Microsoft Online validation and get valid accounts back that way. This is an example of using OneDrive user enumeration. Nixie Geek posted this out just literally a couple weeks ago. It's a revamp, and it's now in the 2.0 version. It's a very amazing tool because if team filtration, if you're not able to do valid account enumeration with Microsoft Teams, more than likely 90% of the time, you're probably going to wind up finding accounts that are using OneDrive enumeration. And the beautiful thing about all this is these are not triggering bad logon attempts against the tenant. So it's largely silent enumeration that maybe a security operations center for the targeted Azure tenant is probably not going to know that this activity is going on. So, kind of some hard truths around user enumeration, because I do get this quite a bit, is hey, how do we stop this? I don't like it that um, that offensive security specialists can enumerate valid user accounts in this method. And really, kind of my whole response is attackers are going to get valid accounts in one way, shape, or form. You can turn off OneDrive, you can turn off Microsoft Teams, you can prevent this type of user enumeration from occurring. But like I said, there's a validate MSOL method that you can use along with a word list and validate accounts that way. On top of the fact that there's other sites that hold like breach data that contains user email formats as well. So, kind of my suggestion here is it really kind of shines a spotlight on weaker secure MFA methods. Um, it also shines a spotlight on weak passwords, which is really kind of what the next phase of what I kind of get into when I feel like I have enough user enumeration done and underneath my belt to get started to go a little bit further. So here we're going back to team filtration. Hopefully you can see this slide okay on the screen grab. If not, like I said, I will have the slide decks posted within the next day or two in my GitHub repository. But there are a couple different valid responses that you get back from team filtration whenever you landed upon an account with a weak password. Two of the typical things that I see is either it's valid, but it has MFA, or it's just valid. If it's coming back that it's just valid, that means either you landed on an account that has not enrolled into MFA yet, which can be very it can happen quite frequently depending on the maturity of your MFA program. If it is backed with MFA, that's totally okay. It may be using a weak form of MFA. I know Microsoft has remediated push requests with Microsoft Authenticator app, but things like call to cell phones, where the message is just extremely generic if you want to accept an MFA request or not, it's just a matter of hitting the pound button and you're really in. So aside from weak password spraying, you can conduct phishing operations. One of my favorites that I at least like to simulate anyway, because I don't go on a whole lot of phishing gigs with M365, is device code phishing. It's an extremely, I think, effective tactic because when the email lands into the victim's inbox, it isn't a cloned link. It's not a replicated link or a replicated site of Microsoft that's going somewhere else. It is going to a valid Microsoft location. And um, it just gives the end user a device code, and they click on that device log on link. And as soon as they enter it and uh, uh, complete the authentication request, a couple things happen on kind of the back end. From an attacker standpoint, they'll get the email crafted and ready to go using a wonderful tool called Token Tactics. Once that fish has been delivered and the user makes contact with it and they authenticate to the application, all of a sudden back we now have a access token that we can reuse into other different places. In the next couple slides, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a really devastating attack that can just occur in the matter of a few minutes on just a regular end user account. Um, uh, Road Recon, Token Tactics, Road Recon, those aren't the only places where you can get tokens. Trusted Sec has a remote beacon object framework GitHub repository that does remote token extraction too. So here I'm just executing that BOF using a interpreter and session, and I'm pointing it back to a PID that is running Microsoft Outlook, and that will return a bunch of tokens back to you for use. So once you have a token, what does an attacker do with it? One of the attacks that I like to do for active recon is reuse it with road tools. There's a package in there called Road Recon. And what Road Recon does is within the matter of a few minutes, if you have a low level account, that token will bypass MFA. It'll proceed to go ahead and download all of your user base, groups, applications, devices, even privileged admin roles in the Azure environment. You really get a bunch of reconnaissance back from it. And this is from a normal standard end user account with no special privileges. So you can be blocking the GUI portion of the Azure portal and still be able to get this information back. One of the other peculiar things that you can get back along with this information is you can parse the database out, and you can get the conditional access policies that that are either in on or off or even in report only. So you know what kind of conditional access policies that that you're dealing with from within the target tenant. So once you're in, this one workload that I will pivot into next is an absolute gold mine. It's SharePoint Online. Generally, I do not find SharePoint Online restricted. once a account compromise has occurred. And by restricted, I mean you're able to access it from a completely untrusted device. And one of the key phrases that that I'll do that will get a bunch of returns back for me is just typing in the common search term of password. You will find Excel spreadsheets, OneNotes, Word documents that contain plain text passwords. And this issue is really kind of twofold here on how this information gets out, at least on a authenticated level. On the back end, what I see a lot of times is somebody will create a public channel within Microsoft Teams, and they will use that public channel to chat within group members and that sort of thing. But then later on, somebody will go out to SharePoint Online and they may see a channel called Information Security, and then they decide to start storing documents around a lot of operations on what their group does. And eventually, at some point, what gets hung up into the situation is people will start sharing spreadsheets with common passwords into other systems. In some cases, it may be service principal accounts or service accounts that may provide some additional escalation into Microsoft Azure. But SharePoint is just an absolute gold mine to pivot off of once you land into the target tenant. So what I kind of do next is, you get a lay of the land between your road recon data. Maybe you have to fish a user with some directory role privileges in the environment. And whether it's a pen test, red team, engagement or whatnot, at some point you're going to have to start doing some authenticated reconnaissance with the environment. And one of the tools that I like to use is called Microburst. That's more for authenticated reconnaissance. You can do unauthenticated reconnaissance around storage accounts in Google searches, GitHub searches, even inspecting code on like target websites. You may find you can do some searches in there around blob.core.windows.net. That is the TLD subdomain on what Azure Blob Storage runs under. And blob storage is still a very, very big problem today that you can find some sensitive information lurking. And it's a really small, easy win from a penetration testing perspective because they are extremely easy to dump. In lots of cases, unless you're running like Defender for Cloud and have your storage account monitored, you're going to have a lot of problems trying to do detections around this if you don't have proper monitoring in place on your storage accounts, because you could have several hundreds, if not thousands, of storage accounts, and all it takes is one of them to be misconfigured where an attacker can dump some secrets. So here, I'm just going to point to a file called secrets.yaml. We'll be getting into that a little bit more about what it contains. This is absolutely something that you could run into that could be stored on a storage account that can provide some additional privilege escalation. But I think this will be a really neat attack path for everybody to see. So along with finding storage accounts, another issue is SAS tokens. SAS tokens are extremely interesting because an admin can create them. They can give very granular to full access with those SAS tokens. They are time-based. At one point, you could make them like unlimited, but now you actually have to select what time you need them to expire. But the weird thing about SAS tokens is they can't be tracked. You don't know who has them, who has been given out those URIs. And I can find them in like Azure resource deployment logs and so forth, and still gain access into a storage account. So if you're running SAS tokens and you don't have any type of program to track who has them, it may be worth it to um, rotate that key and start tracking who has those SAS tokens. So how does this all happen? Well, on the GUI end, on the Azure GUI end, we have a container. You see my other blobs are set to like private, and you see this one container at the bottom called secrets. Hopefully it comes in clear to everybody. That has the public access level of container. Not necessarily a problem, but more than likely it could be if you see something like this, because this is typically indicative that that you have public access on a storage blob. And going back to how we connect to those, I like to connect to them via the front door. I'll use Azure Storage Explorer. I will tell it to access a blob, and then I will tell it to access it anonymously. And then from that point, I can just select all the data in it and immediately just start downloading it all. So the secrets.yaml file and everything is kind of dead in the water at this point on what I'm presenting here today. This was a secret that actually was live in my tenant earlier in the week before I deleted it. And it's just a client ID and secret. We have no idea what it is. We have no idea what it goes to. But we know we have a client ID and secret that we need to start looking to see what it is in the Azure environment. So this is something that you definitely want to keep a hold of and in your notes as you go through the security operation of your target Azure environment, because it may be holding some rights, sensitive rights that could allow you to pivot in further into Azure. So just keep that in mind as we go throughout and how we explore what this client ID is and how we know what kind of level of access that it has. One thing I did want to mention too with client IDs and secrets, they can be stored in other places too. They can be stored in logic apps, function apps, automation accounts. Typically, I'll look in code. I have seen them like in container registry environments too. So they can really be in a lot of different places exposed in plain text. And that can give an attacker another way to pivot in further. So one of the things that I like to do whenever I have a client ID is I need to see what it is and what it's named. And you can do this on the back end. You can do an Azure Log On. And what I like about this method is I don't have to request any type of consent to Microsoft Graph. I can just tell it to give me an access token at the highest level that it can give it to me without requesting consent to other things that may trigger an email to an administrator. So once I connect to MG Graph or Microsoft Graph, I can just do a get MG application. Sorry, I have some applications redacted here. Those I don't have deleted, and I really just want to keep them private. But there's this one called corporate deployment application, and it is matching that exact client ID that that I had recovered from that storage account in my previous slide. So where do I go from here? Well, I have I've phished a user, I have a token, maybe I've elevated my privileges to another user that may have some subscription access via phishing. But anyway, what I'm doing here is I'm replaying a token for somebody that actually does have subscription access into the environment. And I'm running a tool called Azure Hound to give me that data. There was an update for 4.3 not too long ago that SpectreOps did. And they've added some fantastic edges to get global admin more often. So I load these up into Bloodhound and I kind of traverse my path to see what the application holds. And here we can see that this corporate deployment application has um, uh, ownership access to the subscription within Azure. Next to global admin, having ownership access, having something that has ownership access into Azure is just about as good as global admin. And I don't think some people attribute either contributor or ownership access as to something that needs to be monitored as far as like global admins go. But this is a very devastating thing that can happen depending on what you're running in Azure. With this screenshot though, um, it looks like we have ownership and we have direct line of sight access to an Azure Active Directory Connect box that is running out into the cloud. So what do? You can absolutely log into Azure as a service principal. You don't need, you have a client ID and secret. You can't just log into the portal with that. But on the back end, you can log in to PowerShell and you can make sure that you can get the subscription that's in scope for you from your Bloodhound data. And what you're seeing next happen is I'm just assigning a subscope variable of what that subscription is. Whenever I run get AZ subscription, that gives me the ID of the subscription back because I'll need that for my subscope variable. And then what I'm doing is I'm creating a new role assignment. I'm using the object of the ID of the account that I have control over. I tried to use user principal name and there's something funky going on with the new AZ assignment module. So it's very easy to get the object ID of the account that you control as well. But what I'm doing here is I am assigning ownership access to the ID under my control that has access to that subscription. And the reason for that is I want to log in on the front end and do some things from within the Azure portal. So what do we do when we're in the Azure portal? Well, it depends on what all they're running. But if you have ownership access and there are VMs that are running within that subscription, you own them all. You have system level authority access on all of those Windows VM. Even if you are an outsider and all these are running on an internal VNet only, you retain system authority access. There is nothing that's going to stop you from running Azure run commands on a box. So as you kind of see here on the left, just running a simple who am I, see that it comes back as NT authority system. You see that I'm running PowerShell scripts remotely. Don't even need to be on the box if I don't want to, unless I want to do a couple other things, which I have the option to backdoor, create a backdoor and put a local account on the box. If there's something like Azure Bas Station, so that RDP isn't exposed in your network security group, I can leverage that. And all of a sudden now I had pivoted from an external standpoint from an unauthenticated box internally within the target domain. One of our security consultants, XPN, wrote this fantastic script called AD Sync Decrypt. I have a slightly modified version of it in my repo that supports the 2.x versions of Azure AD Connect. And what it will do is it does some PowerShell magic to get the MSOL account that is running on the Azure AD Connect server. And what this account has is some rights that I'm definitely interested in. It doesn't run on domain admin or anything like that, but what it does have is it has Azure Active Directory, domain DC sync rights. So that gives me the opportunity to possibly extract some hashes from the environment. If I need to start pivoting in further from an internal perspective. But one of the more dangerous attacks with this sort of thing is when single sign-on is enabled from an Azure Active Directory Connect standpoint. And there are no warnings about this screen when your admin is looking at it from the perspective of setting up Azure AD for the first time. A lot of people will see this and think, you know what, I want my users to have a seamless SSO experience. So yes, I'm going to turn that on. If you remember back to my first slide deck screen, where I was doing the Azure AD internals recon, I saw the desktop SSO was enabled. This is on the back end on kind of what that looks like. So I've enabled single sign-on. And what some people don't realize is that creates a machine account within your Active Directory environment. And if you experience a internal domain compromise, and what can happen next is that machine hash can be lifted. So here I'm just doing a simple secret dump to extract out that NTLM hash. And what I'm going to do next here is I'm going to use a function within AD internals called new AD internals Kerberos ticket. So if you extract SIDs internally, you can even get SIDs externally from within Azure AD PowerShell if you don't have direct line of sight to the domain controller. But what's really neat about this attack is if you have synced accounts that are stored out in your cloud that are not backed with MFA, and just think in terms of like service accounts, I see them very frequently on different things. You can impersonate any synced account of your choosing. You won't be able to sync cloud only. You won't be able to impersonate cloud only accounts, but you can request a Kerberos ticket and impersonate any user that you want to and get an access token. And so that's where things like global admin could actually be very achievable if you're running a service account that has global admin privileges. But that's where this abusing seamless SSO attack comes into play, because that machine account that I showed on my previous slide here, if you see that in your environment, I would treat it a lot like the KRB TGT account. If your domain ever gets compromised, you're going to need to rotate that account. So we've kind of pwned this entire cloud, but I want to take just a small step back and kind of talk about just some conditional access issues, things that I see very frequently, because conditional access policies can be bypassed if you're not doing them correctly. And one of the easiest things that I see here is device platforms not getting checked. So I think it was around a year and a half ago. Linux was not an option in device platforms. You had Windows and Mac OS. Then Linux became an option. And I think in large, sysadmins may have forgot to look, or maybe they just, it's a one and done type of thing with conditional access and they don't ever look at it again. If you are suspecting that you are doing device platform filtering on any of your Azure AD, your Azure Active Directory conditional access policies, it's worth to see what you're doing as far as the device platform standpoint goes. It is super simple to just switch your user agent string to a Linux-based OS using like Chrome. And then you can find yourself really kind of bypassing something like if you have controls around accessing cloud workloads to hybrid Azure AD join devices, you may find yourself seeing that has just slipped past that gate because maybe they were using a Windows device or more than likely a Linux device to just gain access into your cloud. Along with that, some other things that I don't see. There is a template called securing security info registration. So if an attacker gains access to an account, they may want to go ahead and backdoor that account with another MFA method. So that MFA method would get added to the user account. And if something like this isn't in place to require MFA when you access security information to an account, that can cause those types of things to occur where somebody may slip an additional MFA method to backdoor the account and possibly maintain some persistent access. Absolutely think about doing this. You can exclude trusted locations, but you definitely want to require MFA anytime somebody gets in to an account for modification. And if an account hasn't enrolled into MFA yet, this is useful in kind of stopping some of those attack chains. So not all doom and gloom here. Want to switch gears to defensive tactics and some of the things that you can do in your Azure cloud to kind of prevent some of these things from happening. So back to password spraying and reconnaissance. Whether you're at an E5 level or at an E3, I would suggest creating a fake Azure Active Directory account. You can leave it disabled. You can have it sign some PDFs out in your external environment. The hacker may end up picking that up and eventually do password spraying operations with it. But there are several things that you can do from the standpoint of getting some early warning indicators that somebody either may be actively password spraying your environment, or they may be trying to gain entry into what I just call it a honey token account that should never have a logon period, and your SOC is getting alerted. Along with that, there are several pre-built or pre-canned detections in Azure Sentinel that you can do around password spraying attacks. So if you're an Azure Sentinel customer, it's very easy to set these up. I will caution a word of warning about some of them. If an attacker is doing a low and slow spray against an Azure tenant, it may not hit the thresholds that are defined in here within the KQL query, and you may need to either lower it or adjust a modification where if you're seeing a bunch of logon failures within the span of a few minutes of each other, then that's something that you may want to be aware of. But there are options there. The other really cool thing is there is a article, it's called Blocking PowerShell for EDU Tenants but you can absolutely use this methodology here in this Learn article and block PowerShell in your own tenant. That will flush enterprise apps for Microsoft. Microsoft Graph command line already exists, but what this gives you the ability to do is it gives you the ability to control those two things and who has access to them. Because what you'll see in some other slide decks is you'll see some attack chains that I spoke about earlier just basically being broken. So be very careful around MSL PowerShell. I know it is being decommissioned. I actually found out, I think a little bit over a week ago, I disabled PowerShell in my tenant. Like to do a lot of research with attacks and defense. And I was upgrading my version of Azure AD Connect to the latest version. And I noticed it was executing some MSLL commands. So if you're thinking about disabling MSLL completely, keep Azure Active Directory Connect in mind. You may want to just filter your users on who has access to do PowerShell within your environment. But going on to some of these attack chains, or at least stopping some of these attacks. Here I'm just using a tool called O365 Recon. Nick's Geek made it. Another fantastic tool to get user account information from if you just want to do a quick smash and grab also. Whenever you have PowerShell disabled or Azure Active Directory PowerShell filtered between other users, you'll get this message back saying that, hey, you can't do this. So if I have an account and that account does not have access to Azure Active Directory PowerShell, I'm going to get denied, and I can't do Recon in this manner. Going over to like stuff like Road Recon. So if you do an auth via like device codes and you have PowerShell blocked, you will be blocked in from signing that way as well. Graph will still work okay, but Azure Active Directory PowerShell will not. So here is probably one of the most devastating things that you can do to an attacker from an attacker point of view anyway. And I don't see enough of it. If you have a traditional on-prem Active Directory network, you need to look into doing hybrid Azure AD join. All of these attacks that I've showed you today from an external unauthenticated perspective blocks, this completely blocks all of that. So even if you are able to coerce somebody into device code phishing and they give you a token, that token is completely unusable if you were trying to use it from the outside. So it really kind of stops a lot of different attack chains. Another one I like doing is conditional access statement for Microsoft Azure Management. I know there's an option. There's a option inside of the Azure portal to deny or don't allow non-admins access into the Azure portal. But here's a more granular way of controlling who has your access to do Azure Management. You can do a blanket default to block access, and then you can exclude users or groups. If you do something like this, just make sure that you exclude the on-premises directory synchronization user, because if that gets blocked, then Azure Active Directory Connect will not be able to sync if you have something like password hashes, or it won't be able to do password hash synchronization, and it definitely won't be able to sync new users to the cloud. So you definitely want to exclude that account. And then what I like to do is just set up a management group. And then if somebody needs access to Azure Management that's not like a global admin or whatever, you can put them in that group, and it's very easy to let control on it, or it's very easy to find those users and audit who has access to get into Azure AD Management. Just a few other things. There's a template in Conditional Access around Zero Trust that has a lot of fantastic pre-built templates. So if any of these look new or foreign to you, especially if you're an Azure AD Premium 2 user, you have access to high risk, risky sign-ins and high risk users. Definitely utilize those. Those can be early warning indicators in case you have a user that is using a weak password. That can deny an attacker from gaining access to some of those resources if you have that extra licensing tier. But if you are more concerned about tokens, persistent browser sessions are one way of controlling the longevity of some browser session sign-ins. So that's an option as well. And out of anything, definitely protect your guest users with MFA. That is something that I see frequently, is guests being added into the environment. And I don't know what kind of access that they may hold, but if you have a third party that accesses your Azure AD tenant and possibly has access into like SharePoint or Teams or whatnot, and they're running without MFA, you are definitely running the risk of some type of breach there if you don't protect your guest users with MFA. A few other things. I'm trying to go through this real quick because I'm almost up on time. Monitor your Azure AD role assignments. So if somebody gets contributor access to your environment, there's no default alert for that that triggers an email warning that, hey, somebody has done something. There is a way to get that done in your environment, but it is definitely not on by default, and you definitely want to do this for privileged Azure role assignments if somebody gets assigned contributor, owner, or user access, administrator access to a subscription. There's also options for weak password prevention. It's called Azure AD Password Protection. That will limit some options to weak password spraying if that's actually on and enabled in your environment. It does require some setup on your domain controllers, agents to be installed and whatnot. But it is a absolute killer thing to have on in terms of trying to get weak passwords eliminated from your environment. Just put it into audit mode first. Don't create any chaos for your help desk users. There are other protections too, especially around Azure AD Connect. So if you're an MDE customer and somebody actually tries to extract that MSOL account, they will still be successful in doing so, but you'll have some alerts that flush out via MDE with some detections around that. Got some tips for MFA, because not all MFA methods are really kind of built the same. So in terms of better or best MFA methods to use, out of anything, please eliminate phone calls and SMS texts if you can. Cell phone cloning is an issue, and it's just better to get some of these more to go the authenticator route or even the FIDO2 hardware key route for some of your privileged users on. There is a option for phishing resistant MFA as well for conditional access. So that's something that you can look at too. So if you want something like somebody to have like phishing resistant MFA before they get into the like the Azure AD Management portal, you can look into doing that type of stuff as well. So that is it for me. I have a list of tools here that I use throughout this presentation. I need to get O365 Recon added to here. I'll do that after the fact. My bad. And I also have some excellent references for hardening tips and everything else. So that is it. Thank you very much for your time today. I hope this was informative for you. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop into Discord and probably do Q&A there. So since I'm about out of time, I'll do Q&A in Discord and go from there. So thank you very much for CircleCityCon and everyone on the live stream listening to my talk. Thank you.